Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. Audiobooks.com is the chief underwriter for Good Books Radio, which is produced by UTRGV Media Services for Rio Grande Valley Public Radio. And now, here's your host, Dr. W.F. Strong.
Welcome to this week's edition of Good Books Radio. I want to thank our underwriter, audiobooks.com, where your first book is free. It's a very simple process. All you have to do is go to audiobooks.com and sign up, become a member, pay $14 a month, and every month you get a premium book. Something that's often worth $30, $32. You download it for $14 and listen on any device that's handy. It's a really, really beautiful system for listening to great books that are presented by professional readers. You'll love it. Our book today is The Far Empty by J. Todd Scott. This is a great little Texas novel. It's the best Texas novel I think I've read since I read The Sun by Philip Meyer, and that's high praise coming from me. I'm excited to introduce Todd Scott to you. You'll love his work. We're going to have a nice conversation and talk about this book. Welcome, Todd. How are you?
Oh, thank you so much. And you mentioned Philip Meyer's The Sun. That's an absolutely wonderful book. It's a favorite of mine as well. So.
Yes, and last year he was first runner-up for the Pulitzer in fiction. So, you're in high cotton when I put you in that category, you know.
I'm a long way from that, but he's a great author, and I absolutely love his work. So.
Well, the caveat, to the extent that there is one, is that I am talking about a Texas story. And Meyer's Texas story, now picked up by, it's going to be produced by, one of the TV networks is picking it up, and they're doing a series. American, what is the word I'm looking for? Anyway, one of those channels is picking it up, and they're gonna do a series on it, and it's going to be very good, I'm sure. But mostly, what I'm saying is that we don't get a lot of what I would call really marvelous Texas-oriented stories. We get a lot that are stereotypical, or we get novels that touch on Texas, but not one that's based in Texas that has the authenticity that yours has. And I think you're a very good writer, too. It's beautiful. You have beautiful sentence structure, beautiful imagery, and it really pulled me along. In fact, last night, as I was coming to the end of it, I was standing in the kitchen cooking, but I had your book. I was reading as I was cooking because I didn't want to stop, so I say that's a high compliment there as well. But let's talk about the book, and first of all, the title, The Far Empty. I know a big part of Texas is called the Big Empty. What is the Far Empty?
Well, it's actually part of a line from the book, and I focus on a particular part of West Texas, the Big Bend region, and I fictionalize quite a bit of it, create my own Big Bend County, which is really a mixture of Presidio and Brewster counties. I create my own fictional town, which again is a mixture of a couple of real places down there. But it's remote and isolated but beautiful. Uh-huh. And so in attempting to try to describe that or capture that, the far empty is some words that do, and that's kind of what the book was trying to capture and what that title specifically was trying to convey.
Well, essentially you've taken, as I can tell, Marfa and Alpine and kind of put them together.
That's right.
So why didn't you just call it Marfa?
Well, I like the freedom of kind of being able to play with a little bit of the region. Mm-hmm. I wanted to get it correct geographically in a lot of respects, but I wanted the freedom to be kind of creative about what happens in that area. And honestly, I didn't want, those are great towns. Those are great places, and I'm not sure that my Murfee is. And so, I didn't want to disparage the very places that I had grown to love by putting my kind of crime story in them, so it was easier to create a fictional place, so people would recognize it who knew the area, but wouldn't be offended by it, I guess, in some respects.
Well, that's fair. That's a very good point. I mean, even when McMurtry wrote the Last Picture Show, it was a fictionalized town that he grew up in. He just renamed it. So it's very common to do that. It does free you up, and you don't have to worry about people say, I'm going to sue him because I know he's talking about me.
Right. And again, it allowed me to play with the geography and other things in a way. So again, it would be recognizable, but I wouldn't have to worry about someone saying, well, you got that specific street wrong or that specific mountain range. That should have been 50 miles to the west.
Oh, yes, I understand. Well, but that landscape that you put it in gives it the context that makes you feel abandoned in a sense, especially some of the characters are going through a psychological abandonment, and so it fits what they are suffering.
Right. Yeah, exactly, and that's what I was going for, hopefully.
Well, when you said that the first sentence that you wrote was one that you had carried with you a while before you developed the novel around, in a sense, that first sentence. So what is the first sentence?
The first sentence is, my father has killed 3 men. And I had that written on kind of a scrap of paper I was carrying around for a while. It's one of those things that comes to you, and you don't really know what you're going to do with it, but, it definitely had a voice. And I was actually driving from, the Big Bend, from Alpine to Midland, Odessa was where I was going. And, anyone who's been in that area knows that there's not a lot out there.
That is the big empty.
Yeah, it is. And so I was kind of thinking about that line, driving through that area. It's about a 2-hour drive, I guess. And by the time I got to the end of my journey, I had the story pretty much nailed down, beginning, middle, and end. And I don't think I would have come up with the story had I not been on that drive. And I was able to put a name to that line and to that voice, and that was Caleb Ross, the 17-year-old son of the infamous Sheriff Ross, the sheriff of Big Bend County.
Well, you modeled him after another, the people called him the Judge, and you modeled him somewhat after Judge Roy Bean, didn't you?
A little bit after Judge Roy Bean. That history is in the book. A little bit after the judge character from Cormac McCarthy, Blood Meridian, I'm a huge fan of. A little bit after the real life, cop Drew Peterson, back east. So he's kind of a combination of a lot of people, but I definitely wanted him to represent this kind of mythic lawman, good, bad, or indifferent, this kind of mythic lawman that you sometimes hear about or that's talked about, from Texas history.
He's one sick puppy.
Well, he wouldn't see himself that
way. I know.
He sees himself, I think, as a kind of a keeper of the flame. He represents a long line of men like him who kind of, tamed the West one bullet at a time. And so, I liked to kind of juxtapose the Old West, which is what he represents, I think, in some respects, versus, or the worst parts of it, and to be fair, versus the New West, which I guess, maybe, new Deputy Chris Cherry or some of these other characters I have represent.
That works.
Thank you.
The thing that I thought of often, I'm glad you brought up Blood Meridian, because that's what I thought often as I read this. It but it has shades of Blood Meridian. It has shades of No Country for Old Men. In fact, if this were made into a movie, which it may well be, it would, to me, look like No Country for Old Men. It would have that kind of cinematography to it, not only because of the geography, but because of the characters and all. I think it has just a wonderful macho feel. I told my wife, I said, this is a guy book, and she said, don't say that on the radio, but that sounds sexist, I said, but it is. It's a guy book, it really is. I mean, there are strong female characters, and there's romance and all that, but it's really a book that, if it were made into a movie, all the guys would be rushing to see it, and the women would say, I don't want to see that this weekend.
Well, I wanted it to be a Western, and maybe Western is a guy genre, and I definitely hit on those tropes, you know, and I'm a huge fan of Blood Meridian, of Cormac McCarthy in general, and so, you know, that was purposeful. You know, those were my recognition of a much better writer, you know, working in an area that I, you know, kind of hope to follow in. And, you know, when I described it to, you know, my agent when I was writing it, I described it as, you know, a combination of Friday Night Lights, you know, which is a uniquely Texas story, I think, and No Country for Old Men. And I don't know if it ended up there, but that's definitely what I had in mind when I started it.
Well, the other element here that you mentioned in an interview that I read, where you said that you once upon a time were trying to write kind of like Stephen King, and I saw some of that in, not so much in style, but in terms of putting ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances, which is what Stephen King loves to do. And you did that, you know, a lot of your characters, it's kind of ordinary people, but they're thrust into this chaotic world that they didn't expect.
Right, and I really wanted to do that. I mean, you know, Stephen King has a way of making, you know, the unbelievable believable, and he does that through these characters. And I didn't want my protagonists to be traditional heroes in the sense that they had all the answers and had all the skills and, you know, that they could do everything.
Yes.
You know, I wanted them to be, you know, have failings and to not know exactly what they were doing all the time and to make bad choices. You know, I don't know if it's right as a writer to quote your own self, but, you know, at one point Chris Cherry says, you know, I guess Melissa, his girlfriend, says, you know, you didn't do anything wrong, Chris. And he says, well, I didn't do a hell of a lot right either. And that's the sort of characters that I found fascinating. They're trying to do their best, you know, but they don't necessarily have all the skills or knowledge to do it. So they just do what they can.
Yeah, Chris Cherry is a wonderful character. I really enjoy him. In fact, all your characters are fully developed. You know, they're not cardboard cutouts. They have depth, and they even the what I would call peripheral characters have depth to them. So you've done a great job of creating a book that makes you care about them, even if you just want to see them get what's coming to them.
and I think people are a function of their choices, and most people, you know, you've heard it said before, most people are heroes of their own story, and most people would make great choices if they had all the information. And, you know, most of my characters don't have all of the information, and, you know, they have backgrounds and histories that fold into why they do the things they do. So, you know, there's not a lot of black and white characters in the book. They're mainly gray, and you've got bad people, you know, you've got good people doing bad things, and you've got bad people occasionally doing good things. And I think that's more true, you know, to life.
That's life, yes. Now, every book that I read, of course, I pick up new words, but you introduced me to a new one that has quite a concept behind it called phylactery. Will you tell me about the word phylactery?
Well, you know, it's and I can tell you in the context of, you know, this book, and
yes.
It's kind of a device or an item that's used to kind of hold a soul. At least that's how Caleb sees it. And you know, you have this Caleb who's the son of the sheriff, and, you know, he's kind of afraid at times that, you know, his father, who he sees as kind of a monstrous figure, you know, that he's unkillable, that he's everlasting, you know, because his real soul, the real Sheriff Ross, is hidden away in a phylactery somewhere, and that, you know, even if you put him down now, he would just rise again, and until you find his real soul or his real hiding place, you know, he'll never be vanquished. And again, you know, some of that's a 17-year-old's kind of dramatization, but some of it is also hearkening to this idea of kind of this mythic figure. If you didn't have Sheriff Ross, you would have someone just like him, and even if he was gone, there would be another one to replace him. So that's kind of the concept and the idea that I was going for. And also, Caleb is the only character in the book that's in first person. He's the only one that's I. And, he has a phylactery of his own in many ways, and that's these kind of notebooks that he keeps, which is why his part of the book is in first person. And those notebooks play an important role in the story, and they're kind of his soul and his secrets that he keeps as well.
They say that it's best to write what you know, and you've done that here because let's talk about your background. You spent how many years with the DEA?
Well, over 20, and I still am. So, this week I'm a full-time writer. Next week, I guess I'm a full-time agent again.
And but you were based in Texas at some point.
Right. I've spent a good chunk of my career just kind of by how a career in federal law enforcement goes. I've kind of done a couple of tours out west here, and at the time I was writing The Far Empty, I was in that region, and so it was only natural, I think, that the book kind of developed the way that it did. And the book is not about me, and it's not about my career or even about DEA, but it's definitely been informed by all these years that I've been doing this job.
I was thinking this morning when I was going to interview you, I said, this is probably unusual for you. You're used to asking the questions, aren't you?
Yeah, this whole experience has been, surreal, and I've said it in other contexts that, I've done undercover and things like that, which most people would find, scary or challenging, and yet none of that is as scary as getting up in front of people and talking about, my book and having people read it. It's exposing in a way that I wasn't really prepared for. You'd think I would know better, but I'm not sure that I did. And so, talking about the book, talking about me, talking about this story that I wrote is a whole new experience.
You also have an actual background in writing.
Well, I wanted to be a writer. I, took a lot of creative writing classes in, high school and college. Thought about getting a master's in fine arts, and kind of balked at the last minute and thought I would do something more practical and then get a law degree and go on and become an agent. I don't know if those things were more practical, but they were. It's been a great career so far, and frankly, in both law and law enforcement, you never see this on the TV shows, but there's a lot of writing involved. You're writing reports, you're keeping track of your investigation. So, although I wasn't doing fiction writing, I've been doing a lot of writing, and it's always been something that has been a passion of mine. It's just not one that I, as I said, took seriously until a few years ago.
Well, I think in the TV series Breaking Bad, Hank, I believe, is he's DEA, the main character there, and he's in the office a lot writing reports. But I'm sure that's not even as accurate as what it really is.
No, I mean, I often say that the job is always interesting, but it's not always exciting. And but that's okay. And you don't want it to be exciting every day. And if there's anything else that I've learned over my career, it's that cops and agents or whatever sort of law enforcement you're talking about are great storytellers. They really are. You've got a lot of hours to fill on surveillance. You're staring at empty houses, empty cars, and what do you do but tell stories to each other? And maybe some of them aren't quite true at times, embellished
slightly,
but
yeah,
right, really. But that's what you do, and so I've had a great history of storytellers, and I just decided to try to put some of that storytelling on paper.
One of the most popular interviews that I've done in the past 5 years was with Mike Earp, who wrote a book. He was a assistant head of the U.S. Marshals for 25 years, and he wrote a book on the U.S. Marshals, and mostly what he did is what you just said. He told stories from his time in the U.S. Marshals, and some of those stories have been used in television shows and things, but on our YouTube channel, that to date, that is like top 10 most listened to interviews because people just love good cop stories. Yeah, and
my book is not necessarily funny, I guess, in some respects. Maybe gallows humor a little bit, but I'd like to think, personally, I'm kind of funny, and I got a lot of funny stories over my career, and I can be entertaining at parties, I guess. It's something else.
Well, no, I think there's a lot of humor here, but like you say, it's gallows, it's dark, but the book really moves you along, and that's I read a lot of books, and many books I kind of give up on or force myself through because I must, but this one I wanted to read. It really pulled me in and kept me there and kept me up late and up early, and that's about the greatest recommendation I can give you for a book.
Yeah.
I think.
Thank you so much. That means the world to me. And I wanted to write a book that kept you turning the page. As a reader, those are the books I love, no matter what the genre. You just have to turn the next page to see what happens next, and that's what I was trying to do.
But there's another element here that is very important, and that is that you craft very good sentences, somewhat like Hemingway, good, tight, short, strong sentences that make you stop and reread to say, that's a great sentence. Let me look at that again. And let me read that out loud. I like that. And so there's an appreciation of the aesthetics of it as well as the great plot that moves along quite well. So that's why I say it has shades of McCarthy there, and of course you're a young writer, and you're in your first work. I know you've written a couple other books, but like a lot of writers, you don't really hit until you get to your third or fourth, and then you go back and publish the others. And so, but anyway, you're early in your writing career, and you show great talent, and you will work toward that level that McCarthy and McMurtry and others achieved later.
Oh, thank you. And I wanted to feel like a good writer. It was important to me to have, sentences that, as you said, that people would stop and go back and look at and find something new in them every time they reread them. And, again, I didn't really know what I was doing, but I knew what I like to read, and so I wrote for an audience of one, which was me, and that kind of helped me writing, what's kind of a long book with a lot of characters. I just wrote the story that I would want to read if I was on the other side of the page, and you want to get better with each book, but I think if you can write in a book like that, if you can find 10 or 12 maybe really good sentences that you say to yourself, well, no one else would have written that sentence that way, then I think you can be pretty happy with what you've done, and I feel that way about that book.
Your first sentence is marvelous, and then in the first 3 pages there are 4 deaths, and I said that's a great start. If you can knock off 4 people in 4 pages, that's marvelous,
Yeah, that's a tough pace to keep up. But yeah, it's a dark book and it's a violent book, but I want to think there's some beauty in it as well, and I think it ends on some happier notes. And there's a little bit of a love story in there as well. So
now, are you taking these characters forward? Are we going to have a sequel?
Yes, I've been. The reception so far has been great, and my publishers seems to be a big fan of what I'm doing, and so we've already got 2 more books coming. The immediate sequel is done. It'll be out about this time next year, and then I'm in the middle of the 3rd book right now. If I wasn't,
oh my goodness, you're way down the road.
Right. If I wasn't talking to you right now, I'd be writing it. And they've also picked up a 4th book, which is not in this immediate series, but it's another Texas-based crime novel. So I've got several books coming, and I think we'll keep returning to the Big Bend, in that far empty area as many times as people want to read about it. And not everyone from the far empty makes it into books 2 and 3, but some very important and main characters do. And we're really trying to build a world down there that people will want to return to. And at the start of the far empty, Chris Cherry is a very, very new deputy, and the idea of kind of seeing him and some of these other characters grow over time, I think is interesting, and it's something that we're going to be doing.
I told my wife that we were out in Alpine about 2 years ago. I told her I wanted to retire out there, and she said, "Oh, it's too far from anything. You can't retire out here." But I like it. I like the kind of desolate nature of it, I guess, and the little oasis that is Alpine and Murfee. I enjoy it. Same way I enjoy southern Arizona, actually, because of the sparse population and great vistas and all that. It's just
well, if there's anything I've learned, nothing is too far away from anywhere if it has everything you need. And I think Alpine and Murfee, for most people, has everything they need, and there's some places in Arizona like that as well. And that's been my experience. And I think in the book, so many of those characters are struggling to leave that region and yet find themselves slowly pulled back because, the things they think they're going to find everywhere else, they already have had all along.
Are you talking movie rights?
Well, there's been some, interest in that area, but it's kind of like, a drug deal. That's a good analogy. I mean, if I had a nickel for every drug deal that didn't go during my career, I probably could have already retired. And so, I think there'll be a lot of talk for a while, and then maybe someday something will happen. But yeah, there's been a little bit of interest in that direction, and we'll see what happens. I'm not holding my breath.
Okay. Well, if you need for your newer novels, newer editions, if you need someone to read it in advance, to check it for Texas authenticity, I'm your guy. Okay.
I'll be happy to do that. Thanks so much.
One more thing. Does the DEA mind? Do they care that you're doing this?
No, not really. I mean, if I was earlier in my career, we wouldn't be having this discussion. But I'm at a later part in my career. I'm not on the street the way I was. My job now is to kind of keep those younger, stronger, faster guys safe. And I've done public affairs roles in my later part of DEA's career, my later part of my career. So, I'm not averse to talking about being an agent, but still, I think it's important to note that this isn't about DEA, and so they're fine with me, playing author as long as I come back to the office and be an agent when they need me to be. So they've been very supportive, and the guys I work with, who've looked at the book, they're like, "Wow, this is really big. Did you really write all these words?" But I don't know how many of them are going to read it.
I like that.
But they're very supportive.
My God, this is really big with no pictures at all.
Yeah, no pictures, no diagrams. Where's the cartoons? But I know those guys. I know what it's like to sit on surveillance, so I'll be disappointed if they don't carry a copy with them when they're out there.
I think if they'll just dig in, they'll like it. It's hard not to like it. It pulls you in and it keeps you. So, listen, I thank you so much for spending all this time with us. Congratulations on, your debut work. It's a marvelous piece, and I'm going to promote it heavily.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
We've been talking today to J. Todd Scott, author of The Far Empty. As I said at the beginning during the interview, I said that if you like No Country for Old Men, if you like Blood Meridian, this is a book for you. You want to pick it up. For Good Books Radio, I'm signing off. Dr. W.F. Strong. Here's hoping that all your books are good reads.